Welcome to the 64 Squares studio, where chess history comes to life, one classical battle at the time. Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful day, and welcome back to Decoding the Fisher series. And this time, we are starting a new tournament. On the last tournament, we just saw how Fisher actually played pretty horrible games. He was ranked 21 out of 23 players. It was a USA Amateur Championship just 2 months before this tournament. And now Fisher is playing USA Junior Championship in 1956. And in just 2 months, you will see how much Fisher has improved. So yeah, Fisher is black. So we are looking the position from black side. And his opponent is the Grossguth C. We have no idea and no information on this person, but he is one of the players who is playing in USA Junior Championship. On the previous year, Fisher really scored 50% only on this USA Championship in 1955. Let's see how it goes for now. So Fisher is black, as I said, and his opponent played e4. And Fisher, for first time, played the Sicilian. And it's not the first time, but Fisher showed really nice understanding of this particular variation, which is called the Nidrov, which become Fisher's lifelong repertoire against e4. So knight f3 by white and d6. As I said, it will be a Nidrov. Sicilian, knight f6, knight c3, and a6. We have the Nidrov. And bishop to a2 by white. This is something called the classical variation against knight drove, and Fischer played e5. The standard moves are knight b3 and f3, and we have knight b3 now again. Bishop to e7 and bishop to e3 by white. And sometimes white plays these structures, so white is delaying castle. So giving black an opportunity to castle first, and maybe then white can go for g4, g5 and stuff. And black actually indeed castled, and white played queen to d2. If you are white side on this position, one very tricky line you can follow is pawn to g4 here, because now that the black king has castled, you well, this pawn is nicely defended. You just want to play pawn to g5 to dislodge this knight from the defense of the d5 square, and just play a positional game and maybe castle long and put the knight on d5, and white is somewhat better as per the theory. That's why black actually don't castle on this position nowadays. Black plays bishop e6 or pawn to b5 nowadays. Anyways, so in our game, castles and queen to d2 was played by white, and it is a move. It's played quite a lot, and black plays pawn to b5. Um, a good move according to the theory in 1956, but not a good move according to engines in 2025. Because white has the set of moves which can take advantage of this pawn to b5, and the idea is actually quite clear and quite straightforward: pawn to a4. And that's why you don't play pawn to b5 so early when you are playing knight draw, because this pawn to a4 is a problem. If you, let's say, play pawn to b4, here you have to be very careful with black, by the way. If you carelessly play b4, then knight d5 is already quite winning for white. Idea is, well, why are we sacrificing this pawn, right? Well, it's not a sacrifice because the b4 is hanging and your knight is hanging, and white is pretty much winning. For example, you go back, I take the bishop, and believe it or not, I just long castle, attacking the pawn on d6. Let's say you try to defend it, then I go bishop b6, attack the rook, and after rook d7, I go knight a5, and good luck uh, developing these pieces, right? There's no knight c6, there's no bishop b7, so yeah. A lot of pressure from white side, and white is just completely winning in this position. So yeah, that's one idea which just highlights why you don't play pawn to b5 so early, because of this pawn to a4 good move. But if you decided to play this variation, I will show you what is the best idea. You have to play bishop to b7, where white has few moves. White can play f3, white can play a takes b, a takes b, and short castle, which is the best move. But more than likely, you will see rook takes a1, rook takes a8, bishop a8, and let's say bishop b5, where black will trade down everything and white castles. And okay, white has a very clear passed pawn on the b file, but it's a center game, sorry, middle game. Black has the tendency to play pawn to d5 in the future. So, if anything, it's black who is somewhat better in this position. Anyways, so that's a long detour for the opening, but in our game, pawn to a4 was not played. White played pawn to f3. And this is somewhat a weak move because now Fischer played bishop e6. And actually, white has to play pawn to a4 again, and this is still quite strong because again, if you play pawn to b4, which is a mistake again, then knight d5, and even if you take, and well, there is no square on d5 for the queen, but there is a particular problem. The b4 pawn is hanging, and if you defend it, then bishop goes to b5, and let's say you develop this knight, then bishop goes to c6, and then you move your rook. You have to be constantly look for this pawn because only the queen is defending it, and white can actually just long castle and there is no attack. The c file is closed down by this bishop, and white will just start pushing on the king side and we have no counterplay. So white is again quite better in this position. So if you play against knight rook, these are the small ideas you have to keep in mind. But in our game, white decided to go on an adventure and played pawn to g4. Not a bad move by itself, but the plan which white followed up this position was quite bad. Here Fischer played a very logical pawn to d5 because when your opponent strikes on the queen side or the king side without castling, you rather want to open the center. And okay, here white blundered with pawn to g5. This is very bad. It is borderline winning for black now. And from here onwards, Fischer never let his advantage go. Here, what you have to play as white again is to just simply exchange of everything. And maybe in this position, you throw in bishop h4 check and king f1 and let's say bishop d5. Now comes rook d1 and you have to go back bishop e6 anyways, and now comes move like knight c5, and you can see that the queens are getting traded. Even if you don't try to trade the queen, I'll just take the bishop and let's say I play something, let's say king g2. This is not so simple. Once you develop this knight to c6, then I will play queen here and exchange the queens off, and I do have a bishop pair, right? So, and my king is now safe, and without the queens, you are not really going to get any advantage. So, yeah, this would be fine for white. So, that's what white should play. And I mean, that's what we have to play. But finding that king f1 to g2 is something you won't see in the games. I mean, white don't want to walk with the king, right? White rather want to castle long. So, white played pawn to g5, maybe underestimating Fischer's next move, which is a very strong pawn to d4. A counter attack on, well, it's a double attack, it's a fork. Sorry about that arrow. And, okay, there is nothing better than capturing the knight. Yeah, Fischer just recaptured because these pieces are not going anywhere, right? And this is quite better for black already. It's just winning. And you have, well, I will show you what you have to play as white to survive this position. White has to play bishop f2, where black will not take the knight. Black will throw in this bishop g5 move, and after queen d3 you're not long castling because this bishop, you're, if you castle short, well, good luck defending on the open file. And now I will take the knight, and if you take with the queen, well, this is quite bad. Just knight d7, rook c8 is coming next. This is just game over. And if you decided to not take on c3 and take on d8 first, Then after simple rook d8, bc3, and again knight d7, rook c8 coming next. c3 is weak. I will just play, let's say, if maybe even rook c8, double on the c file, capture on c3. Even this bishop, just bishop f4, putting the bishop on that, eyeing that h2. You're never going out of this position alive. But this is the best you have as white. So you can already feel that how bad the position is. But after this bishop f6, white didn't go for bishop f2. White plays long castle and he plays right into the hands of Fischer. And Fischer took on e3. A good move, a good recapture. I mean, you should capture the bishop, of course. And the idea is now you cannot even capture this pawn because bishop g5. And yes, you can capture my queen, but I will capture your queen with check. And you, if you don't want to lose the full rook, you play rook d2, and then you just give up your rook, right? So that's winning. So after d takes e3, there is nothing better. White just traded the queens. Rook takes d8 and played knight to c5. So white is going to capture your bishop. And Fischer judged correctly that this you don't really need this bishop, and he just played knight c6. And knight takes e6. What else? Pawn takes. And again, a mistake by white. But at this point, there is very little you can do. Rook a to f1. Sorry, rook h to f1. And well, I have no idea why. But now Fischer find the winning continuation. So pause the video and try to find how you can win in this position while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay. The move is the strongest move there is, pawn to b4. And now you will see the idea. Knight goes to a4 and knight goes to d4. This is the move you have to find. And you have to realize that there is no way you can defend this bishop anymore. You cannot play rook d2, you cannot play rook f2. And if you go to e1 with any rook to defend the bishop, there is bishop h4 and you lose that rook. So in the game, white got frustrated and played rook takes d4, just giving up the full exchange for nothing. Fischer just recapture with the rook. You want to have open file, of course, for the rook. And white played bishop d3. So it's trying to set up some type of fortress in this position by blocking the d file. But it does not work because now you just play rook d8. King d1. So king is going to e2. Bishop g5 and king e2. So blockading on the light squares. But here already black has a winning idea. So pause the video for the second time and try to find a very clean winning idea for white in this position, which Fischer missed. Sorry, for black. While I give you a couple of seconds. Okay. So the winning idea is just sack the rook. And after pawn takes, just play rook c8. And there is no defense against rook c2. Combining with this passed pawn and this dark bishop, which will pop up to h4 when if you go to e1, is just winning. You have no defense against this idea, and this knight is just a stupid piece right now. It's basically non-existing. So Fischer missed it. Fischer played bishop f4. Nothing wrong with it. Now you are attacking the pawn on h2, and white played pawn to h3. And Fischer played, I mean, you can play rook into d3, any move from here onwards. And Fischer continued to miss it. He played rook takes rook to c8, just defending against knight c5. And his opponent played rook d1, so stopping rook into d3. Not really, you can still play rook takes d3. And rook c6, effectively blocking every square this knight has by the rook. So that's also an effective idea. But you have to break through at some point, right? White played b3. This is very, I mean, it is very suffocating for white. And black just start moving his king up and played a4 also, like a5 also. And there is just no defense anymore. I mean, there is no moves you can play. In frustration, White played knight to b2, which is a blunder. So for the last time, pause the video and try to find what Fischer played in this position while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, well, it's the same move, and Fischer founded this name. It's rook takes d3, and it was in this position at move number 29 that Grossguth C resigned the game. And what a victory for Fischer, where he just navigates the game flawlessly. And what an improvement in just 2 months from his last US Amateur Championship, where he finished 21 out of 23, and now he's just playing a beautiful chess. So yeah, you resigned here because if you take with the knight, then comes rook c2 check, and if you go king f1, e2 just ends the game. And if you don't go to f1, you go here, then bishop g3 forces you to go here, and e2 ends the game. And if you take with the rook, then rook takes c2 wins the knight. And if you take with the king, then I first play rook c3 check, forcing you back. Then I play rook takes c2, and I win the knight, or rather, I can still play e2 check, winning the rook also. So yeah, nothing to do, and you have to resign, and that's what Fischer's opponent did. If you like this game, then give this video a thumbs up and stick around so you can see how Fischer actually able to dominate the world. And I will see you on the next video. Till then, take care.